Hello, Paul. This is a response to your video, a video that appears on Odyssey, and it's titled, Is Marco a Spiritual Jordan Peterson? So, am I a spiritual Jordan Peterson? Um, there are various propositions that come up in the course of your uh, discussion, your talk, and there you, at the beginning, you open up by suggesting that you're not sure uh, that you understand what I'm talking about, and so then you raise questions. That's very good, I think, and I'll get to the propositions. You refer to Strauss, of course. No one can be, and this is crucial. I don't think that he is being coy, by the way. I don't think that Strauss is being coy here. He says no one can be some possibility that transcends the conflict between philosophy and theology, or pretends to be a synthesis of both. And you've seen that I have objected to the question of a synthesis, right? Now, he says a possibility. Now, I don't take that term lightly. And I take that term in the light of Heidegger, because he is one of Strauss's interlocutors. And as you know, for Heidegger, possibility is prior to actuality. Now, if we assume that a possibility does not exist beyond the conflict between philosophy and theology, in other words, something unprecedented or simply possible, so you consider it as something future, I think that is objectionable, and I think that is Heidegger. Or pretends to be a synthesis of both. I think that the pretended synthesis would be modern science. Modern reason is a synthesis of both. Is there an actuality that transcends the conflict? Let us not underestimate the terms conflict, possibility. Is strife the grounding reality, or is there a cosmos? Now, as we know, materialist philosophy asserts that strife is the fundamental given. Platonism has order as taxis, as a fundamental given. The community of ideas, the eternal community of ideas that on tyranny, Strauss considers to be essential. He stands for it. So let us leave that open as a window of discussion, for discussion. No one can be an actuality that transcends the conflict. No, he does not say that. Right? So maybe the human being is that actuality that transcends the conflict. There's something to the human being that transcends the conflict. Okay, a hidden actuality, a necessarily hidden given. Does Marco conflate the West with Christendom? Well, we saw that there is the West as conflict between Jerusalem and Athens, reason and authority, and Christendom. Medieval Christianity, I think, stands for that conflict, not a synthesis, a conflict. And yet a conflict open to a mystery. Let us not forget the text where we read Strauss as referring to one thing that modern science and I think in modern theology have in common, or must have in common, this openness to the mystery of being. Let us also recall that the fundamental problem for philosophy is the question of the nature of divinity. And so there is something that is inseparable from religion in philosophy. Philosophy is ultimately at the heart. It throws itself, as it were, or rather, it recognizes itself at the heart of the religious problem of divinity. If divinity is not the fundamental religious problem, I don't know what is. Now, and you say that, you suggest that, it seems to you anyway, that I conflate the Renaissance with the ancients. I would say that the Renaissance is engaged with recovering the ancients out of Christianity as an element to be juxtaposed to Jerusalem. So the ancient would be the ancient Platonists. So Platonism is recovered and juxtaposed to Jerusalem, to authority. So there is a rearticulation, a revitalizing of something that was really alive, still alive in the Middle Ages, but that had gone through some problems, if you like, which is what life is all about, problems. No reconciliation of Jerusalem and Athens in Christianity. You refer to that. No, I don't think that Michelangelo is calling for reconciliation. Unless, and here you speak about reconciling Jesus, unless we understand that reconciliation as a poetic image. But that poetic image is precisely what Michelangelo's painting is opening up for us. It's a book, and he has a book, even in the Last Judgment. So Jesus is a poetic image that seems to reconcile the two poles, but that in fact invites us to live out that conflict, right? Now, to live it out means to open up that conflict to its foundation, which is being itself, or a fundamental harmony, the world of intelligibility, the world of ideas, of eternal forms. Okay, then Jesus represents. So in this case, in this sense, Jesus represents the conflict. The problem with modernity is the separation of Jerusalem and Athens. Not quite. It is the alienation of reason from authority. So the only authority that is understood and accepted as real is an imposition on human nature, and so on reason, natural reason. At the same time, natural reason is divested of authority and becomes simply natural reason, as opposed to natural civil reason, as Vico would emphasize. In other words, natural right, the classical doctrine of natural right, is out of the window. Why? Because there is no principle of order in nature. And this is the destruction of Platonism. Now, reducing obedient love to authority, or the question thereof. So you're suggesting, it seems to you that I'm reducing obedient love to a question of authority. But that impression seems to entail peculiarly modern understanding or reading of authority as alien from human nature. Why is um, let's put it this way. Um, how is it that we can have obedient authority, obedient love? And we can have obedient love because we love the object of obedience. Now, the object of obedience is an authority. So, how can we have authority that is lovable? And the only way we can have authority that is lovable is for authority to speak to us, to speak to the most um, hidden depths of our soul. So somehow the external authority must speak to the internal one. And, this is nothing new. Christianity, I think it's all about this. God the Father speaks to God the Son, and God the Son is in your heart, as the Christians say, right? So the two poles are in constant communication. Now, let's see. Dante explaining that Christianity was some kind of synthesis of Jerusalem and Athens, and again, that confused the issue. It's not a synthesis, precisely what he wants to get away from. It is an articulation of these two poles, conflictual, but at the same time, the conflict has its conditions of possibility, and those conditions of possibility are a fundamental order of things. Now, and so a harmony. But where is it? It's an actuality, a hidden actuality that is not to be expressed or resolved in possibilities, or as you would call them, historical possibilities. In the Renaissance, philosophy is allowed in. I have these notes here from your talk, and so, there is always philosophy, and so I don't really understand why it's allowed in. It's just that the Renaissance folks, the Platonists, drew the Platonic dimension of life, but also that was inherent in Christianity. Christianity is definitely entailing a confrontation with the Bible and the pagans. So, and the pagans meant the good part of the pagans, as far as the medieval theologians were concerned, were the Platonists. So they're bringing out this Platonist aspect and confronting it with the Hebrew tradition, hence the Renaissance fascination and, of course, exploration of the Hebrew language and Bible. So there is that tension and this articulation of the two poles that can help us understand Christianity and the challenges that we face. Christianity is a challenge in its own right. Philosophy as handmaiden of religion in the Middle Ages. Another big question. I think that very often we underestimate the work of the handmaiden. We think that it's just, a servant. But what if we understand the handmaiden as the interpreter? In other words, religion needs help. It needs help because it ultimately it does not understand itself. So it needs this help. And we find this in the first paragraph of the City of Man. Strauss emphasizes that philosophy is the handmaiden, the rightful handmaiden of religion. But before we get back to that, we have to deal with other problems. And by the time we get up to the end of the City of Man, last paragraph, we have a reference clearly to the second cave. So if we get out of the second cave, then philosophy can come back to being the just interpreter and of religious authority, which is lovable authority. And why is it lovable? Well, that's because it is not an imposition. It's not tyrannical by nature, by its own nature. Reason had nothing to do with Jesus. Says who? For the medievals? No, that's absurd. Reason is logos. How can we say something like that? It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. Reason had nothing to do with Jesus. I don't know what else you're referring to there. I really don't know. Is there nothing rational about? I mean, okay, reason does not tell us that there will be Jesus the Messiah. In other words, reason on its own will not get to that conclusion of identifying Jesus. But if you want to be a literalist, clearly, reason alone will not give you a particular specific revelation. It will just give you a general revelation, right? So it will tell you that there's God, but not which God, which of the gods, except for the fact that given poetry or the poetic impulse that forges poetic images, then reason can interpret those images, and reason can confront the figure of Jesus, the image of Jesus, as open to interpretation. Okay, but it can be a sacred image. It certainly it could be a religious image, which is nevertheless an image which has a poetic element to it, and there is a mystery to it, which is what fundamentally reason is after, the nature of divinity. Archaeology sparked the Renaissance in art, and I would say no, absolutely not. What sparked the Renaissance in art was ideas. The digging sprung from the idea. They wouldn't have started digging up had they not been moved by an idea. And this is precisely the Platonist attitude towards life, and something that Strauss worked hard to defend. We don't understand things, whatever happened, whatever we do, in terms of material circumstances, but in terms of ideas, guiding ideas. Hence also my video on the tyranny of bad ideas, which is something that has been, I think, underestimated. There was a period of Christianity when it was religion. In other words, no tension at all. No, I don't think so. The early Middle Ages, no, there was still tension. That there was obscurantism in the respect that people accepted religious authority, or authorities simpliciter, as some kind of a bolt of lightning that we have to accept without question. Well, you had cults, you have all kinds of irrational people, but fundamentally, I mean, what are we talking about? Early Christianity. I don't think Paul was that way, and frankly, what do we have soon afterwards? Really, a couple of hundred years later, what do we have? Well, Saint Augustine, and Augustine is clearly not someone who is alien to philosophy. However, he articulates that tension, but there is a tension. Now we have a philosophical scientific society. I would say no, not precisely, and certainly Strauss is not saying that. We have a synthesis, or an attempted synthesis, precisely the point that he raises at the beginning, that you raised at the beginning, and that I referred to at the beginning of this little talk. We have an attempted, pretended synthesis. So we have idealism, so authority, which tells us what we should do, the ought, based on a new is. And the new is factual. The facts, science, well, you seem to take for granted as being scientific or philosophical. But these facts were created by early modern thinkers. The positivist attitude is a modern thing. There's no fact aside from value in the classics, period. End of the story, really. There's something absolutely new about it as with respect to the classics. The facts are modern inventions. Now, what you do have is not a fact, but the atoms in the void, that's a completely different story because they're object of contemplation, objects in the void. Imagine what is that? Atoms in the void. Uh, as it points, they're not physical. They're not they're metaphysical entities. Points, no space, no time, in the void. You know? And from there, from this material metaphysics, materialist metaphysics, they thought that you could obtain everything else, but that's not facts in the modern Machiavellian sense of the term. So, what do we have today? We have a society that is using or has used Platonism to prop itself up this is an alchemic process, an alchemy. It's alchemy. Modernity comes from alchemy. It's on the same in line with earlier alchemy. You got rid of the al of the Muslims, and you end up with chemie or chemistry. So you have the political on the basis of matter. So matter now it's conceived as the motor of political life and transformation. So eventually this will, if you think through this problem, you end up with Hegel. And of course Nietzsche, and of course what we have today. But that's a kind of unpacking that the earlier folks early moderns don't need to think through. It's just that it's there, whether they thought through the consequences or not. That's irrelevant. It's the seed is there. So to have that society, you need to transform philosophy into ideology. Strauss is quite clear about this point. Philosophy has become ideology. Why? Because you need to transform Platonism into ideology that is a repository, in some sense, of the material foundation. Let's see. There is no. Of course, this is cut off from the question of being, of eternity. Conceiving the present in Heideggerian manner. Do I conceive it? In other words, something radically new? No. As I just said, Strauss is indicating what I think is perfectly true and valid, namely that modernity constitutes itself as a kind of synthesis of materialism and a new synthesis. It's a new project, and the early moderns, they see this. It's new. They think it was somehow latent as a possibility in the alchemic tradition, the mysterious tradition of that was sort of an undercurrent throughout the Middle Ages, but perhaps even early antiquity. But what they're doing, as Klein points out, is not to be found in the classics, in the ancients. They are being alchemists. They're not creating something ex nihilo, and in that sense, no, my reading is not Heideggerian. They are reconstituting things. They're playing games, but the result of this game is a new product. Just as you will never find Picasso among the ancients, it's sans précédent. There's no precedence for that. Now, the thinking of the Gospels was essentially Greek, according to Marco. What does that mean, essentially Greek? Was it, the Gospels were written in Greek, in the language of Platonists. But of course, they're written by, I would say that they're written, it's clear, they're written by Jews, because they show that the authors have read the Torah. They've read the Bible, and they're well familiar with it, with Isaiah and so forth. And so clearly they've read the Bible, they've studied the Bible, they're Jews. And yet they were Hellenic Jews, and there were probably, some scholars say, they were writing in Rome. And clearly the Gospels, having been composed, the ones we have, been composed in the light of Paul, and Paul being somebody who's writing for Rome representing the world in a way, well, they are translating, as it were, the Bible into Greek. And what would happen if you were to try to translate the Bible in a classical sense, in the classical sense of the term translate, into Greek? In other words, into the language of the philosophers, really. And you would, well, potentially end up with something like that, the Gospels. Now, Platonism for the masses is good, vulgarized. Let's see. Is Platonism, is Christianity Platonism for the masses? Is it therefore a vulgarized version of Platonism? And here I have a few notes. Off the bat, I wrote, no, Christianity interprets the Bible for pagans. You could speak of the confrontation of Platonism with the Bible to benefit all nations. The Bible is read platonically. That is not until a reduction of the Bible to Plato, thereby imposed on the masses. It is the Bible exposed by Platonism as a divine mystery, open to Platonism. So reason as a way of life, Platonism as that reason. So I think that the Bible, or Christianity, let's say Christianity, shows that the Bible is representing a divine mystery that is open to Platonism. So in that respect, Christianity invites philosophy to seek itself in the Bible. And this is precisely what Dante summarizes when he says that philosophy hides at the heart of God, in the abyss, the mysterious abyss of God. Okay, that's the point. So, philosophy disappearing into religion. Well, in that sense, yes, in some respect, and yet it has its own representation. It is visible. Socrates is still visible. But where is Socrates really? Does he not disappear at the heart of the divine mystery? And for a long, long time, folks have been saying that, right, throughout the whole tradition. In our present place, well, in our present, the present that we live in as a place, we are trained to shun that notion. Philosophy, where do you find philosophy proper? Where do you find reason? At the heart of religion, because at the heart of religion there's the problem of divinity, which is the fundamental problem of philosophy. Even though today we we ignore that. But who says we're philosophers anyway? So, as if there were something in this modernist moment that has never been there before. This is a quote from your talk, Paul. Am I entailing that? Well, I think I've addressed that issue. Our situation is not radically new, you say. Well, depends what you mean by roots, but again, no, not in Heidegger's terms. Paul, now you present yourself as a religious person facing the challenge of philosophy. Now, you say a religious person, you don't say a theologian. Why? And my sense is that you don't see yourself as a theologian, or a full-fledged theologian. You don't find that you have a religious sentiment, but you don't see yourself as a theologian, somebody who's discussing divinity seriously and rigorously, authoritatively. To be a theologian would be to have some kind of a solid authority, to stand for that religious authority. This is what Strauss is up to. This is what he's reminding us of. That the theologian is not a postmodernist talk, somebody who just has a sentiment of religion, of divinity. Everybody does, yeah? And who cares about this intimacy of the divine experience, all these beautiful things. But is somebody who is really taking it seriously, um, authoritatively, and he represents that authority. The authority being the presence of God among men, ultimately. And he represents that authority. And everything he says, he testifies it, he witnesses it, testifies it to it, right? But that's not enough. That's not enough, right? Because to testify to the authority is not enough. We need to figure out a way to think. Authority without reason is dead. I mean, it's an imposition. It's tyrannical. So facing the challenge of philosophy is great, but as a theologian, and not, I mean, not just a more nebulous religious person. It's not enough. In Strauss's terms, now you could just ad hoc consider these terms as synonymous, but with that understanding, then okay, not out there to nail you to a term, but provided we understand that as the key, yeah? This tension. The tension again is not between religious sentiment and reason. No, it's religious authority. And if there's loving obedience, it's not to a sweetie pie of a God, it's to an authoritative God. And now, but that authoritative God, of course, as I pointed out earlier, it has to have something really lovable about him. Not theology faced with so what about theology faced with the challenge of and you're suggesting that he's faced with the challenge of modern science. No. Theology is not faced naturally with a challenge of materialists. It's faced with a challenge of Platonists. In other words, the need for interpretation, natural interpretation that is open in its turn to theology, to the challenge of theology, and thus to the key of theology, which is the sacred, which is the mystery of being. So, where do these two meet in the mystery of being? Or they cross roads somehow, okay? So, let's see. The confrontation of Jerusalem and Athens, just a modernist mistake? Not at all. Not at all. We have an alienation of the two. Now, the alienation, however, in its turn, points to pretended synthesis, or worse, possibilities, the new gods of the future that we cannot know because we end up in the irrational, the complete Heideggerian irrational future, where you're waiting for these crazy gods that you cannot say or foresee anything about. So the modern situation is set up this way. First, you have an alienation of reason from authority, and then once the two are alienated from each other, they try to put them back together again. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall.